Go ahead and share my entire screen. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over why I'm doing this, the desired future, both locally and globally. Some of the existing tools and theories that I found that might help with this transition, a working hypothesis, and a resulting change model that can be, so an attempt to be practical, my project plan and release schedule, and ways that you can help. So beyond kind of what I was seeing locally with a number of people that I care for, that I've worked with, uh, leaving the rat race and retiring and going into real estate, I wanted to investigate, what is it that's going on? And as I dug it in, it was starting to get a little disturbing. So, assuming that most of us spend the vast majority of our time waking hours in the workplace, it's kind of frightening that only 15% of workers are engaged in their work, like at all. The rest are either don't care, actively disengaged, or actively trying to hurt the company. The unemployment rate, very exciting, it's down to 4%, but only 63% of working age people are working or actively looking. You can talk about, some of the traditional roles, but I thought that was really interesting that that percentage isn't higher. One of the reasons for disengagement, I suspect, is because 82% of the wealth created in 2017 went to the top 1% of the world's population, and wages remain flat. And even the World Economic Forum is seeing that as a potential problem. And the other thing I saw recently was that 77% of CEOs are seeing that the availability or lack thereof of key skills is the biggest threat to their business, especially creativity and innovation skills, which is really interesting since you've only got 63% of your working age people working. So there's a lot of individuals. Again, it begs the question, what's going on? And the statistics around the workplace and employee engagement and the skills gap are interesting in and of themselves, but some of the individual statistics I found even more frightening, and as part of what's compelling me to do some of this work. So, according to the American Psychological Association, 61% report that work is a source of stress. And of that, 55%, and this was in 2007, report that deadlines are a source of stress. So if 10 years ago they were a source of stress, I'm sure it's even higher now. More frighteningly, we've got over 1/3 of American adults reporting that they get less than 7 hours of sleep during a typical 24-hour period. And of the people who do get enough sleep, so between 6 to 8 hours, 1/3 of those reports poor sleep quality. So we're underslept. And this is where it starts getting really scary. 1 in 5 American adults will experience mental illness in a given year, anxiety, depression, other. And the World Health Organization is estimating that that number may be underreported by at least 41% because there is still a stigma around mental illness. And even though there's a lot of discussion about it, it doesn't necessarily translate into the immediate community. And this is what disturbed me the most. Suicide rates are up on average over 30% between 1999 and 2016. Some states it's gone up as high as 57%. So we're stressed out, we're underslept, and we're not being terribly well treated. And we're spending most of our waking hours at work. So my desired future, really, this was all started as an attempt to heal my own workaholism. I burned myself out, and I did it more than once. And through that, I feel like I can help others that are suffering from the same affliction. But I think what's even more needed at this stage of the game are people who can help create safe spaces for each other to heal and learn and practice new behaviors. Those safe spaces are absolutely critical for new learning. And any change initiative um, is new learning. And workplaces are asking for innovation and change. So we need to start creating these safe spaces. And if workplaces can't do that for themselves, aren't going to provide that, we can at least try to provide that for each other. Globally, what I'd love to see is us disbanding the cult of busy. So anybody who's bragging how busy they are, start questioning. I'd love to change a system that encourages and celebrates workaholic behavior. Um, I don't know how much more I can say about that. I'd love to see us, businesses or organizations collaborate towards goals that help people and the planet. And people not just meaning shareholders, and even people not just meaning customers, but also the people within the organizations as well. And again, I'd like to see us all inspire each other to create and also to feel safe to share those creations. So, as I was looking for a community and for tools and models and work that's already been done towards these ends, I ran into Humanity's team and their conscious business enterprise or conscious business change agent certification. And so they have a business declaration, and the website's down in the lower right-hand corner, which is kind of their alignment. And really key to this is working to make the workplace a little more humane, people within it a little more present, and encouraging businesses to be a positive member of the local and global communities in which it operates, and treats the people who work within it and treats their customers like the humans that they are. Um, I encourage you to go to that website and really dig into that. So with that, what I wanted to do is share with you kind of my working hypothesis for this work. So the humanities team and conscious business enterprise really have like a four part. It comes from the triple bottom line, so it's really a quadruple bottom line for humanities team and for conscious business enterprise. People, planet, profit, that's part of the triple bottom line, but they add presence. And I would argue that more presence would equal a more humane workplace. And so when I'm saying presence, I'm not talking about what we sometimes hear in terms of someone who has an executive presence. It's really more of the how we're relating to each other. How present am I when I talk to you? Am I distracted on my cell phone? Am I right here? Am I actively listening? So a little more of that type of presence. So my definition of presence for this hypothesis is being right here, right now. I should probably add with you. So the questions that come from that are, how do we bring more presence into the workplace? And we do have mindfulness training that's starting to appear in the workplace. I have some colleagues that are working on meditation in the workplace. But I wanted to find something that was a little more embedded into the day-to-day workflow. How do we do this within the existing language and context of our audience? So I used to work with an IT group. A lot of the people in the IT group, if you mention meditation, mindfulness, consciousness, you get a whole bunch of eye rolls. So I'm trying not to set off any alarms. And then also just to ask a little bit about what is preventing presence. That question isn't nearly as interesting to me as the first two, but I think it's good to at least be aware of potential obstacles. And then, and this comes from appreciative inquiry, are there things that we can already use? I'll talk a little bit more about this a little later in the presentation. So there's some assumptions that I'm making about this. Assumption number one, I only have control of myself. I can't control others. We do a lot of change initiatives based on the assumption that we're going to be able to control others. I don't know about you, but I haven't seen that work very well. So, so as a corollary to that, the workplace as it is will not change unless it's inspired. And there's any number of ways that it may be inspired. The one I have control over is how I show up. So through the way I show up, I'd like to think I can inspire others. The other piece of these assumptions are each level has value and needs to be met where they're at. We talk an awful lot about in marketing and in business is like meet the people where they're at. Um, and I think there's another level to that we need to explore. I'm going to talk a lot more about levels later in this presentation, but I wanted to put this out there right now as an assumption that I'm using with this work. The other assumption I'm making is that presence and the ability to be present is found at each level, or each viewpoint. So with that, I wanted to share some initial findings when I was doing work. And it's going to eventually wind up being an old new, here's what we're seeing with the paradigm, but this is some of the early work in terms of what's important and what we could do to move forward. And the first one that surfaced was clarity around your individual and personal role in the world. So it means each of us getting really clear on our values, our purpose, and how to best serve in the world in a way that's fulfilling. And I wanted to add that second piece of that because I think that's really important. Because oftentimes when we hear about, oh, you need to serve and be of service, I think that's awesome. But for many of us who are really into service and want to serve others and want to help others, we often do it to the detriment of ourselves. And then we wind up like super drained, and then we wonder what the heck happened. And we're not going to serve anybody if we're lying flat on the couch. So adding that second piece in a way that's fulfilling, I think will help us bring more energy into the work that we do. The other piece of this is it's kind of about focus. So as much as I know I would love to be all things to all people, I just can't. Okay, so one of the things that I'm seeing more of, particularly in the past year or so, when it comes to leadership and leadership studies, is the need for focus and boundaries. And that's kind of what this speaks to. So decide your values, decide your purpose, figure out what's fulfilling, and then quit even trying to be all things to all people. The second piece of the findings I thought was really interesting, and it's in alignment with recent work in biology. So a lot of the business world is very much based on this model of competition and conflict. And that stems somewhat from the old Darwinian evolutionary theory, survival of the fittest. Business took it on, survival of the fittest. And what they're finding is that really collaboration and cooperation works a lot better for survival. Again, this speaks to also we're past the point where we can be all things to all people, but this opens up an opportunity for us to find people and organizations with complementary skills and resources. And if you're sharing similar values and sharing similar purpose, and you agree to work towards similar objectives, I think it's going to be a lot more powerful. And I'm seeing this more and more in the business place. I think this is where things might be headed. The third finding is I'm calling resilience required. And Rob Smith over at Integral Life, and he's a student of Ken Wilber's, he mentioned in a talk in May 2018, Resilience is the new scarce resource, and I would absolutely agree with that. If you look at the statistics that I showed you just in terms of sleep deprivation and deadlines and workload, and if you think about it from your own experience, and I'm gonna, I think about from my experience. Whenever I'm overbooked, overworked, and overwhelmed, I am totally not resilient. If my and as a project manager, that's even the worst because you've got everything planned to a T and there's no slack, and then something goes wrong and it just gets bad. No resilience. It's the same thing with any system, and you see this in both in biological systems. You can even see it in mechanical systems. I don't know if you've seen the video of the machine, and they kept having the machine go faster and faster and do more widgets. Not a lot of resilience in that machine when it starts to break down. So resilience really is the scarce resource that we're working with all over. As part of that as well, and I probably should have put this in the slide before, um, because we need more resilience and we can't be all things to all people. We do individually have to take responsibility for finding surroundings, groups, and cultures where we can individually flourish. So I want to posit this. Our time is limited, and we all have 24 hours in the day. I've had a number of people argue that energy is limited. Your effort and time is your energy. And so you're providing that energy to others in purpose of their goals. If it's something, I think it's really behooves us to really start thinking about how we're spending our time and energy, and how we're spending that resilience. And I would ask that we stop providing the time and energy to the destructive. I think really more importantly, where are you going to flourish? Is where you're going to flourish creative? And I mean creative in terms of, it'll help you grow, it'll help others grow, it'll be better for, people and planet, and hopefully profit comes from that. And one of the final things that I noticed in my research is I'm seeing a lot of, okay, what are the skills that you're going to need in the new workplace? Brave new world of work, what skills are you going to need? And these skills came up repeatedly. First is the ability to learn and unlearn. So learn new things quickly. That's something near and dear to my heart. But we're going to be called to do that. How do you put together a framework that you can put your new learning in? Emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills. And I was reading something today where it really is becoming a lot more apparent that in interviewing and even in resume collection, people are looking for others who have good interpersonal skills, work well in teams, have emotional intelligence. Fewer are tolerating brilliant jerks. And so I find that really heartening because I think that helps everything, both personal and professional. And then there's a lot of discussion around creative thinking, innovative thinking, and I would posit critical thinking is also very important. And I see that as two sides of the same coin. Are you creative, but can you also discern what's actually happening or what people are saying, and the truth of it? Those are just a few of them, but fundamentally the skill that's being asked is, what are your human skills? I think if we all work harder to be more human, I think we're going to be doing really well in the new, brave new world. So the next question I had was, how do you bridge this gap? So this is the learning curve, this change curve. You've probably seen different iterations of it. You have, oh, we got this new thing that we're going to do and it's going to be awesome. And then like your expectations become wildly unrealistic. And then the inevitable dip. And it's this dip part that scares people when embarking on anything new. And when I say anything, like not just change, but learning, even like new technologies go through this. I think all of these really are fundamentally learning opportunities. So my question was, how do we flatten the curve? How do you make that dip less painful? One of the ways that we can do that is to see what we've already got available. And this is also is a pretty healthy part of adult education where it's like, okay, leverage prior experience to with um, help with absorbing the new. And so it was really heartening to see that there was quite a bit that we could already work with. Um, and what was even more heartening is that a lot of these theories, models, and technologies have been around for decades and have been through at least a couple of rounds of implementation. So people have already seen where some of the hiccups are. Triple bottom line, B Corp, sustainability. So triple bottom line is the people, planet, profit. Um, Also, conscious business, the humanities team added presence to that. But that's been around for 25 years. B Corp as a certification for businesses. Etsy was one of the more famous models of that. That's been around for a while. If you've got blue trash cans for recycling in your office, you're familiar with sustainability. Um, I think I keep hoping for a more sophisticated conversation around sustainability, also having to do with people energy. So hopefully, a couple of you who are more into that space can, fill me in on that. Uh, Mindfulness, service leadership, coaching culture, mentoring culture. This has all been around for a while. Servant leadership, in particular, became really popular with the growth of Agile. Um, Positive psychology and appreciative inquiry. So we've been seeing a lot of work around positive psychology. That's been around 20, 30 years. Appreciative inquiry, I don't know the background behind that, but that's been a fairly useful tool, and it's been around for a while. Agile, Scrum, and enterprise architecture, so some of the project management and delivery techniques. Agile was developed by a bunch of um, software developers because they were really frustrated with the old models of project management. And they were really looking for a way to be more responsive to their end users, and be more flexible and to be able to iterate a little faster. And there's two parts to Agile. And the second part, one is this iteration, being able to prototype quickly. But the second part of that has gotten lost in most of the implementations of Agile I've seen is sustainable cadence. So the idea being that your workload is something that you can keep doing indeterminately. That tends to get lost. And I threw enterprise architecture in here because I think that's a way to, help provide a framework, or at least it's one way to provide a framework around the environment that you're working in. And then I've added like Kaizen, continuous delivery, incremental improvement, DevOps. So these types of change initiatives, we're so used to these huge Big Bang changes. Everything is revolutionary. This is going to be huge. I don't know if that conversation is really doing us any favors. Kaizen is the idea that, what's one small thing I can improve 1% every day? And it forces you to go, okay, what are we improving 1% today? And I think that seems to develop more sustainable change. I know for me, if I do stuff in small bites over an extended period of time, it's a lot more likely to stick. And there's really good research around that. The other thing that I found really heartening is that multiple different groups are having a similar conversation. The language is just different. So it's been around with the philosophers and academics. So Ken Wilber, who's the guy who developed like the integral model, Don Beck, he's got a model called spiral dynamics, and Don Beck's model really influenced a lot of Ken Wilber's work. I've added Pravir Malik in there. He looks at the world and organizations in terms of fractals. The Fractal Ladder is a really good book that talks to that dynamic. Some of the mindfulness communities have been talking about this quite a bit. John Kabat-Zinn came to mind pretty quickly because mindful his mindfulness stress reduction service has actually been implemented into a number of different businesses. So it's not alien to the business world. Tara Brach and Jonathan Faust occasionally talk about business and productivity in their meditation talks here in the DC area. And there's been a few others. Those were just the two that came to mind. A lot of activity in the organizational design space. So this is a space that I've been kind of nudging around the edges of for a year or so. And there's some really interesting groups that are having conversations around how we can improve corporate culture. And the vanguards tend to be like August, which came out of the Overlap community, a group called The Ready. Both of them, I think, are in New York City. Responsive Conference is a big group of organizational designers that meets in New York City every year. Conscious Business Enterprise, which is the conscious business arm of Humanity's Team, just among others. But I know that this has become a common conversation around culture and culture change. Leadership consultants. These two names, again, a little more into the conscious business space, but I'm seeing a lot of writing about servant leadership, mindful leadership, conscious leadership. So it's becoming a fairly common language. And then I don't know if you've looked at the Harvard Business Review recently, or what's coming out of the World Economic Forum, or what's coming out of some of these big business consultancies. A lot of them are talking about the same things. How do we engage our employees more? How do we reduce employee engagement? How do we reduce our turnover? How do we attract employees? How do we bridge the skills gap? How can we develop employees? So this is really promising. I think we're really close. It's just that right now we're at that stage where these groups are talking about the same thing. They may or may not necessarily be talking to each other. And then project management, and I talked a little bit about that. It is kind of heartening to see that those of us who are really into control and plans are having these conversations. So what I decided to do was I really wanted to find a way to make this practical and put it in a context that wasn't going to set off alarms. And so I thought about it in terms of, we do a lot of change management in business. And as part of deciding whether to do change and as part of project initiation, I think it helps to think in terms of how change management is going to go. So I decided to put together a change model. And to do that, it really needs an all quadrants, all levels approach. And so this is a concept from Ken Wilber, and it occasionally is shortcutted as ACWL. And it's needed for strategy, and I think that this approach is needed for strategy, planning, and execution. So all quadrants, we're really talking about I, we, it, and its. So I is the individual interior. We is the collective interior. It is the individual external. And then its is the collective external. And then all levels. And I'm going to talk a little more about levels, and I'm going to admit right off the bat that I'm still working on understanding what these levels are and how to identify them. But fundamentally, it's not just meet people where they're at, but also to get it healthy, because I don't think we're healthy. And the other thing that tends to be missed, that's in our push to level up or our push to evolve or our push to progress, is transcend and include. So much of our change conversation is about replacing. Okay, we're going to get rid of the old and do the new. I think that there's room here to transcend and include. And I suspect that it's this inclusion or lack thereof that we're starting to see in our environments. So I'm going to talk to the quadrants first, and in the middle of that is identifying what change it is and why you want to make it. And I think that this applies not just to business, and the big change is like I want to change our culture. It's more you can do this individually too, even as I want to lose 15 pounds because my pants don't fit. Because my pants don't fit is the lie. Um, which is absolutely fine. But defining the change, and then what Simon Sinek argues, defining why you're changing it. Why is it important to go through this change? Why is it important to go through the change journey? I think is really important. It's really important before you go through the effort of making the change. And then from there, we want to look at it in terms of the quadrants. And so I'm arguing that we do this, as part of our early planning process. Now, where a lot of these start is in the so this collective exterior. Very comfortable. It's like, okay, what tools do we need to change? What systems do we need to change? What's our strategy? What's our processes? Let's change the org structure. This is where a lot of change planning kind of begins and ends when it happens at all. Another place it might occur, and I see this in slightly more sophisticated organization, is what I'm calling the it. So this is anything outside of myself and anything outside of anything I'm relating to. So I'm calling it as another person. So here it's like roles, the impact on individuals, on each individual, the training that's required for each individual, support and growth opportunities for the individual. Um, so that's what I'm putting in the it category. And again, this is something that in more mature change management organizations, you'll see this type of conversation, ideally towards the beginning during the implementation and planning of projects. Too often I've seen it way at the end where it's like, oh yeah, we need to figure out, we actually need to roll this thing out. Yeah, that's a whole nother soapbox. This is where things get interesting. And this is where I think presence begins to happen. One thing that I don't see people asking themselves is, okay, I've got this change. I know why I want to change it. I've addressed all the externals, but what changes do I need to make for myself for this to work? What adjustments do I need to make? And then secondly, and I think this is really important for anybody who's in a change agent position, a leadership position, even your project managers, your senior team leads, how am I willing to model the change? It's one thing to do a change. It's like, oh yeah, but this doesn't impact me. No big deal. I just made the decision. But people are going to see through that. And I think this is one area where a lot of change initiatives fail. The second area is the we. And so this is typically where culture comes in. And again, this is another place where it fails. Now, I'm defining we as the interactions between people. So shared values, shared purpose, how I need to relate to individuals, how those relationships change as a result. What do I need to model? How do I need to model to this person versus how do I need to model to that person? Rewards and recognition and consequences. One thing I see happen frequently is that this we section, particularly culture, is treated as an it's or a system. And the thing that we need to keep in mind is if we try to separate ourselves from the culture, it's just not going to work. And so what I'm doing here is I'm defining culture as the sum of interactions between people. And the thing is, you're interacting with people. And I think it's that interior, the internal. This is where the presence comes in. This is where I also expect to see a little more resistance. But I think it's really important to have this conversation. Now, that said, this is where I think appreciative inquiry will help. Hoping you can see this. So appreciative inquiry, at its core is what's already working, and then focusing on that. And I think this is going to be one of those other things besides, leveraging uh, some past stuff that's already there. That's going to really, really help. So it's looking at within myself, what am I already doing that's working? That'll help also with the change. So we don't have to change all the things. Um, in terms of the people that you work with and interact with, who already models it? Who can be your potential champions? And what's already working within the relationships and how the teams work and how teams work together? Both you within the team and also what you're observing in the interactions between um, people who are working together. In the it quadrant, there may be people who already have the skills you need. Or if not, there may be people who can be upskilled quickly, either because they're really fast learners or because the job they do has a pretty good parallel to, has some foundational skills that they can use to upskill. Um, and then are you guys already doing things that you can use for upskilling, just by making a minor tweak? Or like a low risk pilot for a group that's already doing an awful lot of what you're asking from the change. And then the its. And so this is kind of the physical, what do we have lying around the office, what's already working, what processes already work, best practices, that sort of thing. So we've got the quadrants and we've asked questions of the quadrants. And so then the next thing we want to look at is all levels. And I'm going to look at levels both individually and also kind of as levels of collective value systems. And I'll admit that I'm a little hesitant to use the word levels simply because in this initiative, I'm not entirely certain I want to think of it in terms of better or worse. But I haven't really found good phrasing for this yet. But one thing I would argue is one of the reasons why we're struggling with all these change initiatives in the workplace is because individually, for most of us, our foundations have been destabilized. You saw the statistics on sleep. 1/3 don't get enough sleep, and of that, 1/3 of them get terrible quality sleep. Food quality. Look at our dietary environment. Exercise. Our environment is making us a lot more sedentary. On top of that, and that's just baseline level. The next level above that is security and safety. How safe do you feel in the workplace? And if you feel safe physically, how safe do you feel emotionally? How secure does your job feel? And then on top of that, we're seeing a lot more evidence that there's something happening in our environment where people are feeling a lot more lonely and like they don't belong. Do you feel like you belong in the workplace? How's your friends? There's starting to be more studies that our technologies are actually reducing our feelings of belonging. And so these are the first three levels of Maslow. So I think part of it is that we really need to figure out if we're going to make these changes, what's the foundation that we're making these changes on? And then even looking outside of ourselves with the people that we're working with, what are they working with? What's their foundation look like? If you've been working them 60 hours a week plus and they're on call 24/7, do you actually have people with the foundation that can help that have the resilience to do the change? A lot of hard, uncomfortable questions. And then the second level of levels is kind of more like value systems. And so this is kind of this is from the Daily Evolver, and this is a combination of Don Beck's spiral dynamics and Ken Wilber's um, integral theory. And the number of levels you'll see, may change depending on which model you're looking at and what the context is. But fundamentally, if you look at the American workplace and the American population, Beck and Wilbur have both noted that the majority of the American workplace and American culture are housed in either the traditional, the modern, or the postmodern levels. So traditionalists tend to be very ethno or nation centric. They value rules, roles, and discipline. Tend to be conservative. You know, probably more interested in operations, take pride in their work. Um, this is the majority of your corporate leadership, very driven, very individualistic. If you look at a lot of what's happening with the entrepreneur, a lot of the entrepreneur literature is all about, drive and, get stuff done, and that's no risk taking. That's very much in the modern area. And then postmodern, of which there's not that many. Know that the estimates are about 10 to 15%. These are the people who are, about equality, about environmental, more world centric. And one of the first levels that start thinking a little bit more integrally. But the thing with each of these levels is that they're wildly different worldviews. And so there's two pieces to this. One is needing to be able to communicate whatever solution you've created for that change to each audience, but also appreciating the contributions of each audience. And I think that's the piece that's gotten missed as we, drive towards progress. We spend so much time replacing, we might want to consider, what the strengths of these levels are, because Wilbur would argue we go through all of these levels at some point as part of our development. So within those of us that are equal, we do have, the risk-taking, self-reliant piece that was developed. And I'd actually go through Ken Wilber's work to really see more of that dynamic, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. So the question as we look at the change model is to evaluate what level we're working at and how healthy is that level and how open is that level. So first it's determining, okay, what's your view? Okay, or what's your level? What's your native level that you tend to operate at? And then what's the view of the other person you're talking to? So in some ways, this speaks a lot to like communication plans and stakeholder matrices. What's their view? What's their main value system? And then what's the general cultural view of the organization? So if you tend to operate as, say, postmodernist. You're very interested in quality. You want your solution to be good for the environment. You're really into the triple bottom line of people, planet, profit. But your culture is very much, winner take all. Need to go. Must get ahead in the world. Which is more of a modern view. But you're talking with someone who's very change averse, very traditional, takes pride in their work, that might be a traditionalist view. It's really good to kind of evaluate where it's at. And then there is a view required for the change. So if your change is requiring a different perspective or a different level, and the bulk of your organization is like traditional, it's going to be a lot harder to implement that change. The other questions that you want to ask is how healthy and how open. Because the way someone in a modern environment, you can manifest it positively in terms of, I've got, I want to achieve and do good work, and I want to push the envelope a bit. And then there's unhealthy, as in, winner take all, and I'm going to win. There's there's a level of healthy and unhealthy, and then there's openness. Are they open to other perspectives, or at least the next level perspective? Are they arrested, as in, well, I might listen to it, I'm just not ready, or are they closed as like, you're wrong, So those are also really good things to evaluate. So that was a little bit about the change model. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what this project is. The project is a book. This is what I'm calling it for now. I, I'm open to new titles as things surface. The book itself is going to serve as a foundation. I do have a coaching consulting practice with a project with like a how to survive the workplace model. It will be integrated, most likely in the visioning area. And then ultimately, I do see this potentially as workshops in 2020. And so my schedule looks something like this. I am writing this in sections. Uh, Projects this big, it's easy to. This just helps me. My intent is to have the business literature section done by September 1st. Most of the research is complete. I do see occasionally when I dig into this stuff, I have more questions and I have to go find more books. But I figure having a deadline like this is going to keep me from researching all the time and actually put stuff on paper. 1 month after that is the philosophy theory survey section. I do have a little bit, I still need to solidify my understanding of the levels. Nature of transition comes right after that. A pretty healthy chunk of that's written along with the solution again, where there's parts of it already written. Some of it's on my blog. My goal is to have an entire book ready for outside review by December 1st and a book launch by July 1st of 2019. And so this is where you come in. One of the things I really need are some reviewers. If you're willing to review a section, that's awesome. If you want to just wait until the overall book's done and review that, that's also awesome. Also, anybody who is willing to take a look and help me with copy editing, I could use it because a lot of the books I'm reading are very academic, and I know that my writing tends to reflect what I'm reading at the time. So any help in copy editing to make it a little less academic is great. Marketing and branding. Neither of these are my strengths. I'm not, as you can tell from this PowerPoint presentation, I'm not the most visual person. And marketing is something I'm just learning, but I'm still not terribly comfortable with. So marketing strategy, branding, anybody who's really got expertise in book design and layout would be super helpful. Funding. I do take donations, but I would also love ideas on sources. I really, one is, I am supporting myself through this business. The other is it'd be great to, have some funding sources, particularly to make the book nice, make it look good, pay people for copy editing and marketing and branding and book design. So any funding sources that you're aware of or for research, that would be awesome. And then expertise. I could really use some people who know a lot more about some of the philosophical theories, positive psychology, flow, integral theory, spiral dynamics theory, people who also do an awful lot of work in the organizational design space, people who are doing a lot of work in business. Boy, your expertise, I would love to talk to you and help you, and I'll definitely give credit where credit's due. Or if there's someone that you can think of, among others, that you think I should talk to, just let me know. So with that, I'll stop sharing and attempt to get back to my webinar. So I very much thank you for your time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send out or link to a survey, and that will help me significantly. And if there's any comments that you have regarding what you've seen here on this presentation, please let me know. I am wide open. I'm just really grateful for your feedback. Thank you.